My husband and I had a very precious teacher. We've had many in our lives, but one was, his name is Jean Klein, and he was from Bavaria and had lived in France, Paris, since World War II. So he was very French, you know, just that delicious French. He wore like raw silk, white clothes, and an ascot, and a white straw hat. And he was really beautiful and elegant and lovely. And he said one of the high arts of recognizing your nature is listening. It's deep listening. And I know during the meditation, and then just a few minutes before I began to speak, you just fall into this listening. And it's the river and the sound of the wind that goes through the leaves. And it's a quality of sound that really you can, you know, it isn't like specific, I hear the universe, but it has a sound. You know what I'm talking about? Kind of a quality of aliveness, the deep sense of consciousness. And more as time goes on, because I heard him and we sit with him, oh, I don't know, 28 years ago, 29 years ago. Some of us are slow learners maybe, but I get what he's pointing to. You know, it's falling below the, whatever that is, where the mind does its thing. The mind talks and thinks. And there's like a level or a layer of dimension. Do you know what I'm talking about? You can kind of contact it. And it's more prominent sort of in front of the eyes, in front of the forehead. And it kind of goes da 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 da. And it has like a substance almost to it, right? It's contractive. And then that listening is sort of below that, through that, above that, and all around. So it's a quality of like a atmosphere, right? It has a quality to it that is, I don't know, I want to say real, but that isn't really quite right. It's palpable. It's a quality that's palpable. And it's the field, if you want to call it the field. Aja calls it the context. But I feel it as like a field, and it's like has a atmosphere, a quality of fullness, of completeness, and all is well. And, you know, we tend to try to identify that, and we call it consciousness, and or if we're, you know, a certain kind of awareness. It's love. That's really what love is. You know, it isn't like being nice to your lover or your kid or, you know, your friend. That's an expression. But love is this substance, this atmosphere. And then everything that is born and expresses and resolves back into the home ground does so within this atmosphere, this fabric. One of the most beautiful descriptions I've ever heard, and I know I've repeated this many more than once, I'm sure, And Reggie Ray is a very devoted teacher and practitioner that had a center in Crestone, the Dharma Ocean. And some people here, actually, we had, I don't know what, 3 retreats there, I think. Beautiful, beautiful place. And he's a professor and a scholar, and he's written many, many books. But his teacher was Trungpa Rinpoche. That was my first teacher as well. And Trungpa was considered the crazy wisdom. He was perfect for the 70s and the 80s. The 16th Karmapa said, yes, he was an alcoholic. Yes, he was a womanizer. Yes, he was in crazy wisdom. But he was one of the best teachers that have ever been born. So it was that kind of, wild and crazy times in the 70s and 80s. But he was totally devoted to Tibetan Buddhism and to Trungpa. And so we asked him, he said, because, Trungpa Rinpoche was considered a tulku. And a tulku is one that has continual wisdom from lifetime to lifetime. They don't lose it and become, have to learn it all over again. It's a continuum. And so Trungpa was considered, a high lama and a tulku. And he said, what is your experience of loving awareness, of pure awareness? And they don't use the word love, they use the word more compassion. What's your experience? And he said, it's like sunlight. And there's an origin of that sunlight. And that sunlight holds and pervades and moves all experience, all form. And form appears, such as these bodies, and then it moves and lives and then dissolves and rises once again, eternally, right? The great creatrix and that is the great destroyer. But it is not touched or affected or increased or diminished. This sunlight that is constant and pervades literally everything. And there is no exception to that. And that spoke to me in a really deeply profound way. There was just this shift, I know you know what I'm talking about. This is a very beautiful, mature Sangha. It looks like you've got something, right? And then it all falls apart and then something else appears. And it's almost like what I've got it, goes, whoo, that's just like some dream. Doesn't mean that it isn't true. But it dissolves and then another sort of a rising of truth and the real deal just keeps appearing and dissolving and appearing and dissolving. And pretty soon you give up what is one of the greatest obstacles of the spiritual personality, and that is, I've got it. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Right. It's just a part of it. Jennifer lent me one of her books, one of precious teacher, Joel Goldsmith, and it was called Practice the Presence. And he calls it the horizon. You reach and there's this horizon and it's vast and true and real. And there isn't someone in there going, well, is that real? I don't know. I read something else. I don't know. That doesn't, line up with what I just experienced or read. None of that is there. It's just like, there it is. It knows itself. So those horizons, they arise in this sunlight this atmosphere, this inclusive, permeating love and creation constantly. But things are arising, forming, dancing, living, dissolving, birthing, forming, dancing, dissolving continuously. And somehow the view, that is perceiving this and knows itself as true, is a part of it, but it also is a kind of, I don't know, observation isn't quite the right word. The Tibetans use the word the view, and I think that's more accurate. You know what I'm saying? That's always true. You know, you could be making love, you could be angry at your partner, you can be, slurping up your favorite food, you can, whatever it is, but there's something that's absolutely, totally constant. The view, right? So that example that Reggie Ray described, it was really profound for me. I lived in that totally, really, as totally as possible at the time, for probably, 3 or 4 weeks. And it didn't go and come, it was just a part of what was happening. And then like everything else, kind of relaxed and dissolved. But that realization of what's happening remained. So living the presence, practicing the presence, is these constant recognitions of itself in its myriad of forms and myriad of ways of informing and teaching. But it's not to hang on, not to try to grab it, not to try to make it into something. But what you start to really get, and that's the emphasis of this retreat, at least here, and I think usually Jennifer and I, we don't talk about what we're going to do or anything, and then we sit down and say, well, I was thinking maybe this should be the focus. And she said, yeah, I was thinking the same thing, right? So it's your life is the practice. And, in Buddhist circles, it was called mindfulness. And though, like most in our infancy, and we all thought we were pretty cool in getting, the right answers and pretty sophisticated, but we were, maybe pre-infants. Was the mind grabbed mindfulness, right? And so there were all these robot-looking people walking around being mindful. And something in me thought, nah, I don't think that's what's being pointed out. But what really was being pointed out, and it took maybe, a couple of decades, of recognizing that mindfulness is awareness first, pouring through, folding the laundry, being grouchy, being loving, working in your garden, doing the dishes, cooking the meal, being beautiful and spiritual, and being a real jerk. It's that constant view of what is. And the life is the retreat center. It's the retreat. For many of us, and I remember one of the first questions I asked Aja, we heard him in 2000, he was giving a talk, and there were all these sort of non-dual teachers, because that was the thing. The non-dual was hitting, the consciousness was coming through. used to be hidden and secret. And now it's just like blasting through. And my pain, because, you know, always as a child, I just loved God. And if you don't like the word God, find something that works for you. God is fine with me. Compassionate intelligence, the great being, the holy presence, the spirit. Find something that's very intimate for you. But for me, God worked. And I didn't have any of the ideas and the beliefs and the vengeful God and sin and, you know, hell. And it wasn't like I forced myself into a different belief system. It just simply wasn't there. And something went, well, if y'all want to believe in a God like that, okay. But that's not my belief. The God here was, it was pure joy and wholeness and completeness and all's well. Even as a little kid, and I was neurotic as they came. You know, my childhood and my mother and my father and my stepfather, and then my own mind, pretty crazy. Everyone's into dealing with their abuse, and well, I had like, you know, a lot of chapters to see through. But something wasn't touched. Something wasn't affected. Even with all of the abuse and craziness and neurosis and depression and sorrow, something wasn't touched. So that sense of all I wanted to do was just to know God, you know, that really was the focus of this life. Though I lived a very, very full and rich life, you know, I was a part of the 70s and 80s myself. Anything went. What rule could you break? That was the real question. But eventually, okay, so this is where I was going. So when I first discovered retreats, this was my home. I was born for retreats. So I would go and I would be trained. I was trained in sort of the Vipassana tradition, and they were very clean, and, you know, no bliss wasn't even mentioned, and enlightenment wasn't even, there wasn't even permission to use the word enlightenment. And so it was just very pragmatic and grounded, and, you know, and that was great for me. I needed that at the time. I needed that training. But I realized that all I had to do was gather the craziness of the mind, and then something broke through. And that's what I was after, was what broke through. And so there would be a certain kind of presence, a light, brilliant presence. And sometimes it would move into bliss, and other times there would be great sorrow, you know, just ridding the mind and exposing the mind of all of the pockets of pain and sorrow and, you know, craziness. I mean, the mind is crazy. You might as well just like acknowledge that. It's not a good master. Not at all. I mean, it allows you, especially in this culture, to do well in life, but it's not a kind master at all. In fact, I was raised, or most of my adult life was in a university town. And of course, you got to know a lot of the professors, and I loved college, and, you know, to walk on the grounds of college. And I always thought I wanted to be maybe a teacher in some college. But I'll tell you what, those folks are mean to each other. I mean, competition and who's right and who isn't, and tearing them down and, but it was the intellect. It was run by the intellect. And I don't mean that to be true across the board, but it was sort of shocking to me because I had just this ideal, feelings about college and I loved it. I loved when I went to college. So when this would break through the mind, it was whole and complete and beautiful and everything I ever wanted and I was not getting in my daily life. And then I'd go home and that's when the fire hit and the neurosis would be exposed. And of course that was love, right? It was exposing all of the places that had been defended or projected or intellectualized or whatever. But I didn't get that. I just thought I lost it. So then I'd get the money together and time together and sign up for another retreat. Well, I had done that for years when I met Anja. And so I wanted to be free of that hell realm, really. It was a hell realm for me. And I was even going to give up God and give up retreats. And of course I didn't. I just, hauled myself to another one. And so I asked him, that was the question. I said, how do I move out of this getting it and losing it? And I don't even remember what he said, and his presence was so complete, it kind of just went, and I never asked that question again. It was over. Now that's the sign of a good teacher. But I guess what I'm trying to get across is your life is your practice. It's not going to a retreat and then dumping all this stuff and opening to these wonderful realizations. That's all a part of it. But, finally there's a retreat mind. You know what I'm talking about? You get into a certain place in a retreat. And you may, if you're lucky, it may last, for a while, sometimes for months. Now the realizations continue. I'm not saying that they go away eventually. Because there's enough clearing. That hell realm that sometimes you would enter when you got out of a retreat and thought you lost it was actually unconditional love. That was like, digging up all this that was obscuring the pure light of awareness shining in your life. It was that simple. But I didn't get that for really quite a long time. I didn't have, I've got it now. It wasn't my personality. But I did get, I lost it. It was really, really hard for a long time. It was really hard. Because there wasn't anything else really I wanted in my life. But that broke through too. But now, it's very simple, actually. It's become extraordinarily simple. That is shining through pretty much is constant. It doesn't come and go anymore, no matter what. But no matter what the activity, this and this is one experience. It's no longer divided in any way. And that means I cannot feel well, I can be grouchy, I can be, folding the laundry, I can be whatever. But pure awareness and what this activity is one thing. And that's, I still watch the news occasionally, and it's a hell realm. The hell realms are being exposed now. They've always happened. I was talking to my assistant the other day on the phone and talking about something that was happening. And And they said, yeah, but hey, and we went through all the things that have happened on the planet before. How about when these guys were playing soccer and the losers had their living heart pulled out, still beating when they lost, right? How about these little kids in England that were starving to death and stole bread and they were hung? How about when women, were considered witches? And you know what I'm saying? So this is really kind of light. I mean, it really is. It looks like hell, and we're watching it, and I'm not diminishing the suffering, but this has gone on and on and on and on. They put them on like racks and blew open their joints. I mean, this is the way life is. So I guess what I'm I don't know where that all came from. I mean, and we were joking. We were like, well, how about this? Well, yeah, I remember, when they did that, so it kind of puts it a little bit in perspective, right? So I'm not saying this, compassion isn't, you can cultivate compassion. But in my experience, I've never been great at cultivating. I just am not great at it. I become it. Do you hear what I'm saying? Some people are really good at practicing gratitude or practicing, compassion or practicing, whatever. But I was never really so good at that. But it would just happen, right? Because awareness fundamentally is harmony. Loving awareness is harmony. And then how it moves through the atmosphere and all of the effects and dimensions and karma and effects start to create then these weird hell realms. But fundamentally, it is still harmony. It's not touched. So when you watch the news or whatever it is that you tuned into, you may pray, please forgive us. Please forgive us for our unimaginable ignorance. I love you. I love you. I love you. And you're weeping. But then it passes. It passes. It's not that you're denying what's going on the planet. That's not the whole deal. It's not denial. And it's a kind of entering into it. And you do so with the hell realms of whatever your mind can bring forth. You enter into it. You don't try to move out of it or spiritualize it or, oh, well, it's just a dream. That ain't it. It's loving, open awareness. And if falling on your knees in sorrow is called for, that's what happens. If a prayer, may you be free, may you be free, may we know and live this freedom, then that's what's pulled forth. You hear what I'm saying? Whatever is experienced, open or the awareness coming from origin of everything, and there's no split in what's being experienced or seen. And most spiritual people really don't want to do that. They want to jump out of it and be free. And we've been taught that a lot. Now, I don't mean you grovel on everything. I mean, you see, that things are just not worth thinking. They aren't true. They've never been true. They will never be true. And you can just say, thank you for coming up, but, this is not true. But some of the really deep shadow that's coming forth now on the planet and in our own personas This is love. This is being permeated by loving awareness. This is being made conscious now. And of course, we have the technology that we can see it instantly when it's happening. It's all perfectly in place. And it's horribly unconscious and out all at the same time. And can we be compassionate enough and open enough and vast? I contain multitudes, right? That's what that poem was about. And then there's like, we become conduits, open to consciousness, open to solutions, opportunities, open to the great, vast, golden blessing of the Christ. And I don't mean Jesus. Christ is just simply God-filled. Humans, God-filled, Spirit-filled. And then there's this active, I don't know what the word is really. It's a participation, but it's just a being that is open to itself. It's vast and can embrace what is. Oh, what are those yellow, beautiful, whatever those birds are over there? And it's a constant transformation. You are engaged as a constant transformation. And it's like a pollution, a water that's a stream that's all polluted with all this junk and poison and unconsciousness. And as this water comes from the pure source and it pours through, it begins to purify. And you become a transformative, purifying presence. And that's doing the dishes. That's being kind of a jerk. But you're watching yourself being a jerk. That's the difference. Right? Jerkdom seems to happen. I don't know why. Maybe it'll wear out, but I can't see it has totally happened here. Ask Nate. I'm really mellow, actually. I'm really quite mellow. I hardly ever fight. But boy, that Aries, when it gets lit, it goes. And he just kind of goes. And I said, I'm the fourth Aries, wife and lover that you've had. You should have known what you've got. Come on, this is no surprise, right? I said, what is it about an Aries? What do you find about an Aries? I mean, obviously you're attracted to them or something. And he said, because they're always right. And I said, that isn't true. He goes, see? I never forgot that either. I mean, I remember that now. It's an automatic da-da-da, boom. So now I don't quite do that in the way that I used to. Anyway. So jerkdom happens. But it's seen. That's the difference, right? It isn't a projection. It isn't a victimization. It isn't a defense. It's just, it arises somewhere, from somewhere. Have you noticed that every thought and response arises from the same ground? Have you noticed that? It's a big one. It's a profound realization in meditation. Because it isn't like now, ooh, I like that thought. Ooh, I hate that thought. Ooh, I blah, blah, blah. It's just arising, falling, arising, falling, arising, falling. It's one of my practices right now is I'm a human being. I'm gonna have an opinion. It's okay. I'm not gonna be whatever. Probably Teresa Avalon is not gonna be, I'm not gonna float out of here. Right? That probably ain't gonna happen. I mean, maybe, who knows, but I doubt it. But I don't have to close on my opinions, and I don't need to defend them. And so it's just, I'm a very energetic kind of person. Everything is felt in like an energetic kind of a quality. And so, as things come up and people have their opinions, you like to hang out with people who have the same opinions as you do. That's more fun. But if someone doesn't, and if you've noticed, there's a lot of opinions floating around now, it's just, it's all that's happening. It means nothing. Absolutely nothing. You don't need to defend it. You don't need to stand on the right side. You can say stop, and that's appropriate sometimes. Or you can move yourself away. That's appropriate sometimes. But you know what I'm saying? Because immediately when someone has an opinion and it's a little bit different than your opinion, then you kind of like gather yourself and then you give your opinion. And you got your opinion from the source that's true. And then they have their opinion and they're gathering their opinion from the source that's true. There's nobody there. And finally, I started to go, well, this is a worthless dance, really. Because I could keep going with my opinion and they'll keep going with their opinion, and I believe my opinion comes from the right source and they believe their opinion comes from the right source, and nothing's happening really. It's just kind of stirring up defense, really, vulnerability, not being heard, not being right. That's what it stirs up. So that's the practice right now. I just feel, is it open? And it's sort of like the sunlight, there's just a rising and form and falling and things happening. Or do I need to make it right? It's a wonderful exercise, actually. You have lots of opportunities. Crestone is like wild. Talk about vast opinions. Every opinion comes up in Crestone. So I have a lot of practice. Everything that arises in your life is God, or the compassionate presence, whatever you want to call this that we are, this that forms, this that dissolves, this that creates, and this that dissolves. Everything. It's a beautiful book. It isn't even out in print anymore, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was about a man, and his spiritual name was Pisan, and he was wild. He took it to the max. Gay guy, in a band, Queen, heroin, alcoholism, prison, the works. There wasn't anything. And he was beautiful, beautiful physically and charming. And, he was a wild boy to the max. So probably in his late 30s, he almost had killed himself. He'd been in car accidents. And had some surgery where his stomach was over here instead of down here. And I mean, it was wild. But he was just very pleasant and happy. I kind of like that, I just went for it. And he wasn't all sorrowful and, hated himself and grouchy to everybody, He was just, he was okay. But he was dying. So a friend said, well, let's go to this, Roshi, Suzuki Roshi, I've heard about, in the San Francisco Zen Center. And he said, well, okay. He's barefoot, and wild and crazy clothes, San Francisco in the 70s. And he just walked in and he went, I will do whatever is in front of me. They want me to sit, I'll sit. They put him on washing dishes, he washed dishes. He went to the kitchen, he did the kitchen. Whatever it was, and eventually he'd his mind was pretty trash, with all the stuff that he did. But he even sort of organized and took over, certain parts of the Zen Center. But it was just like something in him just knew, you just do what's right in front of you. You just make yourself fully present with what's right in front of you. And he called the path is underneath your feet. Your path is underneath your feet. I call it the current. There's a kind of a flow or an unfolding that's right here. And the mind may question, or the mind may have a strategy, or the mind may do whatever the mind does. That's fine. Mind likes to think, and it's like a puppy. Let it out and let it play. It enjoys that. There's no problem with that. The mind is a profound tool. But it's underneath your feet. I have been the lucky receiver of so many wonderful teachers and books. I've probably read, I don't know, several thousand spiritual books through the years. Traditions. I've just been so lucky that way. But what I just recently started to get is that I couldn't quite just say, well, I'm a Buddhist. Well, I'm a Christian. Well, I'm a Jewish. Well, I'm a goddess worshiper, or I just couldn't do that. I could just see the holy presence in God within all of the traditions. I just didn't have any problem with any of them. And yet at the same time, I didn't, throw down my staff and say I was a part of that. Now, I'm not saying, we each have our dharma. The path is underneath our feet. And if you're drawn to a particular tradition, go for it and take it all the way. Just keep your own authenticity. That's the important part. But what I started to realize, and I was in Santa Fe, and I went to one of the best bookstores in the United States, in my view, called the Ark. And I've read Mirabar Starr for many years, different books that she's written. But anyway, it was called The Ordinary Mystic. And Aja had called me a mystic once, and I thought, I don't even know what that is, I just thought because I could see, that was what he called. I don't even know where he was coming from. But all of a sudden, I thought, yeah, the mystic is in awe of life as it is. The bird flying, flowers blooming, something really painful and what we would perceive as horribly ugly, or a child as you walk past and you lock into the baby's eyes, the baby's eyes locks into you. the stunningness of a wonderful meal or a good conversation or finding out some beautiful nugget in someone's life that they've not found someone else to share it with, and they're sharing it with you. Do you hear what I'm trying to say? It's the ordinary life. Equally at home in a Native American ceremony and in a Buddhist transmission. Because you just see it's all one fabric. It's the sunlight. And it's all just arising and dancing and forming and dissolving. And this life is like this. That doesn't make it less. That makes it more cherished and exquisite and rich and whole and holy. And it doesn't care about your opinion. It really doesn't. Could care less. Okay, well, whatever. You want to destroy your life or your relationship because you aren't willing to see what actually is? Go for it. See how that goes. You hear what I'm saying? I don't know if you have these. Most people in their own way do. I call them teaching dreams. And during the night, there'll be these great senses of recognition, of really deep, clear, whole states of being. I used to think when I woke up, then I got it, and it was just a precursor. I had to wait a long time sometimes before it actually opened up in my life. But what I'm trying to say is it's constantly giving itself. In your dreams, walking across the floor, a conversation, walking through your garden, listening to that harsh master called the critical mind. It's all the same. It's all the same. There's a beautiful teacher, I've been listening to her. Nate got but we still listen to CDs. I guess it's not even heard of now, but anyway. And he called it his favorite CD. And you probably remember her, Richard, when she came to Boulder, Candace O'Denver. Do you remember her? And it's this particular talk is just so absolute. It's just absolute. It is, now I feel like being a spiritual person, but today I'm kind of grouchy, so I'm not going to be a spiritual person. Or now I'm going to be a spiritual person because I just got out of the retreat. But when I get into traffic, I start cursing and yelling at people and hating my life and thinking I'm going to move to the country because that's the only sanity there is on the planet, right? You hear what I'm saying, right? It's like, you're not a loyal lover. You're not loyal. And it takes loyalty. Hers is small but frequent moments. And that was her teaching. Frankly, I don't think too many people got it. I kind of knew them. And she left Boulder, and I guess she's living in Bolinas now. I asked Nate to try to find her. But what I'm trying to say, she said, she calls it unflinching, which is a perfect description because flinching is that contraction. Now I'm me. Now I believe my thoughts. Now I believe my opinions. Now I have an identity. Unflinching, arising, being seen, arising, consciousness, arising, being seen. That's what she's pointing to. And she said, and she was raised, upper middle class and, San Francisco, the elite, and, I think was married to some big wig guy or whatever, and did the whole thing, lots of alcohol, lots of cannabis, trying to find whatever would create this sense of constant peace. But she said I was unflinching. She said, I would not be here speaking in this way if I had not been unflinching. So it does take that. There's a certain phase. We go through all these different phases as the path unfolds. But there's a certain phase. I will not be moved. And that's what it's pointing to. For her, she didn't really tell the story. I was listening to another CD and she was talking about that something so horrendous happened in her life. And she'd had many insights and many recognitions and read all the books and, hung out with the San Francisco elite, people that were all awake. But she said I was unflinching. It just broke everything. The only thing that she did know was there was a presence that was constant. And so she stayed with that presence, and she was broken for I think 7 to 10 days, I don't remember. And the end of 7 to 10 days, there she is. So there's something about that commitment, and not like this, my mind. It's thoughts arise, thoughts fall, thoughts come up, thoughts go back down. What remains? And that's where one rests. And you can develop it, it can be look behind your head. John Klein taught that. For me, that changed everything. It's not there anymore. It was a pointer. I talk a lot about, the channel, the central channel, the spine, and sort of like a quality, almost like a cloak-like quality of awareness that envelops you and pours forth. Do what works. Find what works for you, but then be unflinching. That's the deal. And then something on its own, because it's who we are. That's why it's so true and present and constant and always and never fails. Because we're breathing, because we are breathed by and as awareness. We'd be a pile of dirt on the floor. So because it's true, it breaks through. And then the light and shadow show that you thought was who you are. And believe you me, the spiritual light and shadow show has the most obstacles, shall we call it politely. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You better know what we're talking about. And that unflinching, that constancy, no matter what. And there you are. And the world needs us so much now, so much. And there's not one in this room that does not know your nature. There's not one person in this room that does not know their nature. And it calls for us to stand up and be present, no matter what. And then it just takes over. Many of you know what I'm pointing to. It just takes over. And then your life is that. And it never stops, as far as my own experience can tell me. It just gets more whole, more true, more ordinary, more present, more unconditional, more interesting, more full of grace. And sometimes wildfires of insanity comes through you and you can't even stand up. You're knocked on your knees with it. That too. Right? Anyone notice that this winter? Jesus. So if there's ever a time, now is the time. It really is. The world is not going to go on as it has always gone on. We don't know what or how, but we know that inside of ourselves. And that we know that we are born for this time. So on that high note, practice of presence. So you can drink a glass of water, go to the bathroom, walk, in awe of this beauty. Good Lord. You know, have you seen images, of Gaza that's just like, places of extreme war? I mean, it's just, there's not a plant, there's not a flower. The houses are destroyed. There's just rubble, chaos. And yet, this too. And somehow we hold it all. Somehow we hold it all.